Hey, folks. Hey, folks. Welcome to EarthSky. And today we are traveling back to ancient Egypt. The pyramids, the Sphinx, monumental temples and tombs, and all of it covered in enigmatic art, some of which showed what we still see today in the night sky. Centuries later, however, we don't know for sure what that celestial art meant to those ancient Egyptians. Those were real people. But luckily, our guest today, Dr. Or Graur from the University of Portsmouth in England, has some new insights to share with us in interpreting some of that artwork. Specifically, he thinks the ancient Egyptians left us clues to their view of the cosmos through their depiction of the sky goddess Nut. It's spelled N-U-T, but it is pronounced Nut. Welcome, Or. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me on the show, Dave.
Oh, hey, really proud and pleased to have you. Okay, so you published a paper, I believe it came out this month in the Journal of Astronomical History and Heritage, that, like your previous work, is adding more evidence to the idea that Nut represented the Milky Way galaxy, at least as one of her aspects, as we see it here from Earth. And you know what? Here is the goddess in question. This is her there in the middle. She is what she's arching over. What are we seeing here, or what are we looking at here?
So what we're looking at here is a version of what's known as the cosmological vignette. So we have Nut as an arched woman. She's naked but covered in stars. She's arched over her brother and husband, Geb, who is the god of the earth, and she's held aloft by her father, Shu, who is the god of the air. So in a sense, what you're seeing here is the separation of earth and sky, and how exactly the sky is held over the earth instead of crashing down. We're also seeing a few other things. We're seeing the solar cycle. On one side, we see Ra, the sun god, in his solar bulk, and he's rising in the east. It's dawn. He's rising in the east, and he's sailing across the sky. And then on the other side, we see him setting in the west, down into the welcoming arms of Osiris, the god of the netherworld.
There is a whole lot going on in that image. Wow, it's packed with all kinds of mythology. So for Nut, how did you investigate and try to figure out her mythological role? What was the process that you used to do that? Can you tell us about that?
So it started almost by chance. I'm not an Egyptologist. I'm an astrophysicist.
Right.
And a few years ago, I started writing popular science books. I wrote a book about supernovae, and then I sat down to write a book about galaxies. And in this book, I have a chapter on the Milky Way, and I wanted to explain where the name Milky Way and galaxy come from, and what the origin stories are. And that takes us into the Greek mythology and its Roman derivatives. And in most books, that's where the authors stop. They usually stop with the Greco-Roman myth. But I wanted to show more. I wanted to show names and origin stories from around the world, and wondered and started collecting stories. And when I came to ancient Egypt, I found this suggestion that Nut was the Milky Way, or that the Milky Way was a representation of Nut. And I saw these images, and I loved them, and I wanted to have them in my book. But when I read the papers, I just wasn't convinced. I wasn't convinced by the arguments. And at that point, I said, okay, well, I can't use this. If I don't agree, then I can't have it in my book. But as I collected these stories, I would also tell them to my daughters as bedtime stories, at least the PG-13 ones, and they really love to hear about Nut, and they love the images. And we live in Cambridge. There's a good museum here, the Fitzwilliam Museum. They have a good Egyptian collection. And so we went there, and we saw one of these cosmological vignettes. And then, we saw a few other things. We sat down to have, a cookie. And as my daughters ate, they also, they drew. We gave them paper and crayons. And one of them drew the cosmological vignette in its entirety. Nut held by Shu with Geb. And she also drew herself to one side, kind of looking at this. And I said, what, this is a really powerful image. It's a really interesting story. I have to have it. So I started researching this myself. I wanted to see whether I could prove or disprove that there really was a link between Nut and the Milky Way.
And so to do that, you looked at a lot of funerary art, didn't you? And let's take a look at some of this stuff. Here we go. Tell us about that, and why is she turning up so often in funerary art? The on the tombs and on the coffins. What's going on?
So Nut turns up very, very often in mortuary art because she has a few important roles in the transition of the dead to the afterlife. She embodies the tomb and the sarcophagus and the coffin. She is also a protector deity. There are a few deities who protect the dead, and she is one of them. So on many coffins, you will see her on the lid of the coffin as in a kneeling position with arms and really wings outstretched. So wings outstretched to the side, protecting the deceased. You may also see her, inside the coffin, again, protecting the dead. There are some images where she gives food and drink to the deceased and the Ba soul. And then there's the cosmological aspects, which are different but connected. So she has many cosmological roles. She protects the world from being flooded by the waters of the encircling void. But she also plays a very important role in lifting the deceased up to the sky. And here we go into how the Egyptians thought about the afterlife. And that changed over the many, many centuries of Egyptian history. In the very, very beginning, 5,000 years ago, back in the age of the pyramids, the afterlife was thought to be in the sky. The king would die, and he would be lifted into the sky by Nut. She would hold his arm up to him. He would have to sail through her body, just like the sun. Nut would swallow the sun, and then the sun and the king would journey through her body, which was the netherworld, until they reached the west, where she would give birth to them once more, and then the king could rise up to the northern sky and join the imperishable stars, and so live forever. So even here, in her cosmological and mortuary roles, they are connected.
Yeah.
We see in these images, we see a few examples of this. So in the previous image, we already saw the solar bark sailing over Nut. In here, in the bottom left, the black and white image, you can see her swallowing the winged sun and then giving birth to it again in the east. And there are other versions of this where you see this in more detail.
Okay. But none of this says to me Milky Way, but you
Neither, it doesn't say that to me either.
right, but you did focus on one particular image. And
So before we go to that, I'll
okay,
just say,
please.
back in the early 90s, there were two Egyptologists who also looked at these images and said, look, we see her sometimes in this arched position covered in stars. That reminded them of the Milky Way, which at certain times also looks like an arch in the night sky. Exactly. And by the way, this is an image that was a photograph taken by Osama Fathi, an amateur astronomer in Egypt. And so they looked at this and they said, okay, you know what? We think that the Milky Way represented Nut. And they tried to map her onto the Milky Way. They tried to locate her head in a certain constellation and her groin in another constellation. And each of them had different mappings. And I wasn't convinced by their arguments. And then I started looking into the ancient sources, the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, the Book of Nut, and discovered that she couldn't be the Milky Way. She had to swallow the sun. And she also had to give birth and swallow certain stars that rise and set throughout the night. Now, and she's described as her head being the western horizon, and her groin being the eastern horizon. Now, the Milky Way also rises and sets, at least different parts of it. If you were looking at Sagittarius, you would see Sagittarius rise and set. So that these two things don't work together. In order for her to give birth and swallow stars throughout the night, her head has to be locked to the western horizon, and her groin has to be locked to the eastern horizon. On top of that, she is always described as the sky. So in a paper I published last year, I suggested that maybe the Milky Way only highlighted her presence in the sky, because there's a passage in the Book of Nun that describes her arms as being at a 45-degree angle to her body, which is very, very specific. Her right arm is on the northwest side, her left arm is on the southeast side. And that happens to be the orientation of the Milky Way during the winter months. But during the summer months, it flips. So I said, maybe during the winter, they saw the Milky Way and they said, oh, look, this is showing us Nut's arms. And then maybe during the summer, they said, oh, it's showing us her backbone. But even I wasn't too convinced by these arguments. But I said to myself, you know what? Okay, you've said something. You can put this to rest. But I started giving talks. And when you give talks, you want to show beautiful pictures. And that's when I saw the image that you were, I think, going to refer to.
I think I am. This one here.
So this is the cosmological vignette on the coffin of a priestess of Amun called Nesita Ujatachet. And here again, it's the same thing. Nut held aloft by Shu, Geb is underneath. She's covered with stars, but this time there's also this wavy black line running from the tips of her fingers down to her toes, and it bisects her with the stars on both sides. And at this point, I had seen a lot of images of the Milky Way. I had seen images of what other cultures thought of the Milky Way, and I said, this looks very familiar to me. This wavy black line looks like the Great Rift. It looks like the lane of dust and nebulae that block the light from the stars in the disk of the galaxy. So you see this black lane, and then these two lanes of diffuse light or stars on either side. But I'm an astrophysicist, and I mostly measure rates. I measure the rates of supernovae and other types of explosive phenomena. And so when I saw this, I said, okay, cool. How often does it occur? And that's when I started collecting coffins. So I created a database of more than 550 coffins from all dynasties throughout Egyptian history, and found that the cosmological vignette was only visible on 123 of those. And of those, 118, so most of these came from one dynasty, the 21st dynasty, which is about 3,000 years ago. It lasted less than a century. And they have these beautiful so-called yellow coffins, and that's where I saw this, most of the time. But I only saw this curve once. And then I wrote this up, and I showed and sent a draft to an Egyptologist in Canada, Sarah Siemens. And she said, okay, this is interesting, it's cool. I think I've seen curves like this in some of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, which are from the New Kingdom, which came just before this dynasty. And so I started looking again, and she sent me to two tombs, and I found it in two other ones, and things started to connect. I saw this curve again. I saw it bisecting the astronomical ceiling in the tomb of Seti I. So you have the northern sky on one side and the southern sky on the other, and you have these wavy lines in between. And the Milky Way, when you look at it, it bisects the sky. And in another tomb, the tomb of Ramses VI, we have, I think you may have this in one of your slides. We have...
Was that the thumbnail where she appears to be swallowing the cosmic disk, or let's take a look.
It's where she's very, very elongated. Now, if you go forward.
We have this one, and finally we have this one.
No, so you don't have that.
No,
okay.
I don't think I have it. I'm sorry.
So anyway, in the tomb of Ramses VI, we on the ceiling of the burial chamber, Nut appears twice. She bookends the book of the day and the book of the night, which describe the journey of the sun during the day and then again during the night through the netherworld. And in both cases, she's arched and elongated. She's covered in stars. And you see both of these images back to back. Okay, so you have kind of two nuts kind of back to back. And in between them, there are these two wavy lines, but they are connected to them. So those wavy lines, they start at the base of Nut's hairline. Then they go over her back, and they bend over her backside. So so those curves are connected to her. They are part of her. They're shown between her, as in they're separating the two skies. Here, the curve is shown on her body, but again, it seems to be separating, the stars on the top and the bottom. So I started to think, okay, it adds to the narrative. Right? On top of that, there are a few spells in the pyramid texts, which were carved into the pyramids of the Old Kingdom, that describe how the sun and the dead king crossed the sky from the west to the east over something called the Winding Waterway, or Winding Canal, Mernecha in Egyptian. And it's not clear what that is. Some Egyptologists think it could be the Milky Way. Others think it could be the ecliptic. But here again, it kind of made sense.
Let me
The
explain
sun
quickly
sets in the west.
that the ecliptic is the plane,
I
is the
can't hear you.
projection of Earth's equator onto the celestial sphere, and it's where you'll find the planets and the sun and the moon.
I think we lost audio. So I didn't hear your last question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have my audio. I hope everybody can hear me.
No, can't hear you.
Mm. Okay, well, looks like we have got ourselves a pretty good problem here. If you can't hear me, we can't keep going. But let me say this, folks. We were, Gloria Ann Bergen says that she can hear me, and Michelle says that she can hear me, and they can hear you, Or. So, unfortunately, Or can't
I'm sorry,
hear me. Yeah, he
Dave,
simply
I can't hear you. Do you want me to reconnect?
You know what? I think we're going to call it a day. I think we're done. I'm sorry. Everybody can hear both of us, but you can't hear me. You've lost your audio, and I don't think we can resolve that. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for today, folks. I apologize for not getting all the way into this as far as I would have liked. And I'm going to thank you for being here. I am going to remind you we're here every day, weekday, at the same time, 1750 Universal. And I'm going to invite you back because on Monday we'll be re-examining that. We're going to try to get the information out about America's sinking cities. And that'll be on Monday. So thank you for joining us. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. And we're done here today, I guess, unfortunately. Cut off too soon, in my opinion. We were, but I think we presented everything. Folks, thank you. Or thank you so much. One Earth, one sky, EarthSky. And we will see you the next time around.